wanting to comment on news topics like politics, race, social justice, and gender without actually commenting on those topics. And that's mainly because I've been conditioned and trained not to add my personal take on such things, but rather to simply present the facts. So, for example, to this day, this is something that I do. I purposely share the same words on social media whenever I post about a Black person being killed by police. Since 2016, roundabout, whenever police kill a Black person and the case is highly publicized, I write, "Life is a revolving door." And that's not nearly as direct as posting "Stop killing us," even if that's really what I want to say. But I often saw my colleagues being much more direct than I was online. And so the purpose of this study is to understand the considerations, motivations, and strategies of Black journalists when they are deciding whether to and how to engage in conversations about contentious topics online. And the greater goal of the study was to better understand how one of the most underrepresented groups in the journalism industry, one that only makes up about 7% of the profession, participates in this often required public facing daily professional routine that is communicating with readers, viewers, and listeners on social media. And so my study draws on these three theories. Quite simply, co-cultural theory just focuses on how marginalized groups communicate within a system of dominated, or within a system that is dominated by a more privileged group. So in this case, it's how Black journalists communicate in a profession dominated by their white colleagues. Professional identity for journalists identified five ideal typical values and traits of journalists, and those traits were public service, objectivity, autonomy, immediacy, and ethics. And ventriloquism theory is within a communication scholarship, it's a metaphor for creating this illusion that a human being or non-human is saying or doing something on their own when in fact someone else is actually behind making that person or that thing do whatever it is that they're doing. So, put another way, a social media policy of a news organization or the widely accepted rules of the journalism industry is actually what makes a journalist tweet or post what they do, and that may be in there may be a disconnect between what they actually do versus what they're supposed to be doing. And so those policies can then have power over what the journalist actually shares online, even if the journalist feels like they're the ones in control. And so the overarching research question here is, what do Black journalists working in or near large cities consider when contemplating whether to engage in social media conversations about contentious news topic or news centered on politics, race, social justice, and or gender in the United States? And to answer this question, I examined their communicative strategies and how the roles of identity, and that's personal and professional identity, as well as their professional demographics, such as the type of news outlet they might work for, whether that's TV or print or digital, but how all of those things play a role in their decision making. And so the study employed two data collection instruments. There was a pre-interview questionnaire that was designed to recruit participants into the study. It yielded 55 eligible respondents, and there was also a semi-structured audio recorded 1 hour interview with about 31 there were 31 participants, and I recorded those interviews on Zoom and Otter. I used Sharmaz's grounded theory research design, which included listening to and reading each of those interviews at least 3 times to make meaning of what the participants said and to develop the model that I'll propose in just a few minutes here. All of the participants were Black journalists working in the top 5 U.S. media markets. Those cities are Chicago, Dallas, LA, New York City, and Philadelphia. And the sampling was intentional because news organizations based in or near large cities are more likely to employ journalists who then have a larger audience or a larger social media following just based off of where they work. And so that larger following also means that there's a larger impact of their social media activity. So let's get into some of the data that I mentioned. Journalists often consider the feedback that they expected from their organizational leaders and colleagues and sources and the public and their family. In one case, even dating prospects, strangers who often said that they were, so happy, and it was just really gratifying to know that there are Black journalists in the world. One of my participants, Scott, did say that. And so when weighing whether to enter these social media conversations on these contentious topics, participants also considered if their career could survive a bad tweet, or whether they were surrounded by Black leaders or true allies in their newsroom who could speak up or would speak up for them if they were to get into trouble for something that they shared on social media. And in some cases, they also thought about their physical and mental health. You'll see here that Kobe noted a concern about the reaction of editors with hiring power, and also he had a fear of offending white people. That was a constant fear. Kobe talked about often feeling like he is surveilling himself, so that he knew he had to be really careful because he just didn't have the same kind of latitude that some of his colleagues may enjoy. But there were some other participants like Carolyn who spoke about the reaction of sources and how opinionated posts might block her from getting a good story. So for her, getting a little hot under the collar, as she says here, isn't worth the risk to enter those contentious conversations. And so here we have something that I'm very proud of. This is Perry's inverted pyramid of Black journalists' social media posting strategies. Now, taken together, participants in this research used 11 posting strategies. So this model, based on the interview data, is here. The strategies are listed in order of most used to least used. The strategies are yielding, avoidance, circumspection, moxie, grouping, strategic inquisition, modification, veiling, suppression, compliance, and expungement. Now, I wish I had time to go through all of these, but I don't. So today I'm going to focus on the 4 strategies that I found to be the most interesting and the ones that I hope that you will find interesting as well. And so that's yielding, moxie, strategic inquisition, and suppression. So yielding is a strategy that journalists use to give credence to people who are better positioned to speak on contentious topics. So it could be sharing the opinions or the work of others without adding additional comment. So for those of you who are familiar with Twitter or X, that could be the retweeting of other people. However, quote tweeting, which is retweeting with additional comment, that could also demonstrate yielding if the additional language that accompanies the original tweet that they're sharing is less about quote tweeting with the journalist's take on the information, and if it was more about praising the original post or the original tweet. So in this case, Uriah demonstrates that journalists are quite capable of and willing to yield to noteworthy ideas and opinions of other people, and often some of them are willing to discuss and debate those issues openly. Moxie is a strategy that displays the journalist's candidness during social media conversations. So journalists displaying this level of confidence and boldness, they really lean into their personal experiences and they stand on that professional experience to correct misinformation and disinformation, and they also use it to launch discussions on contentious topics and to answer challengers and also to kind of challenge these troublesome ideologies. So here, Felix demonstrates his belief that he has a right to post what he wants, journalist or not. Felix was actually one of my favorite participants because he was just so open and just so straightforward. So everything about Felix screams moxie. And I hope you guys will ask me to expound on him a little bit later. Very, very interesting participant there. Strategy 6, I call strategic inquisition, and this is when a journalist posts questions instead of comments to participate in these conversations. And this may actually be something that people who are not journalists do. But these questions are likely to be more critical than earnest inquiries and more sarcastic than sincere. And the journalist uses strategic inquisition to achieve this level of like plausible deniability about openly displaying opposition or any kind of criticism that they might give, and they base that on ambiguity. So here, participant Wanda, a news manager, explains her use of strategic inquisition, and she says she's used it in conversations about the attacks of Black women online, reproductive rights, politics, and she's a big fan of plausible deniability because she also talked about successfully using this strategy when she was called into HR about a different post. So she uses this quite a bit. So you'll see here that, she says, did I just hear that? Or what did they say? Or why are you talking about? Why are you expressing that opinion? So these are just some of the questions that you might see journalists using online, or that you might use yourself even if you are not a journalist. Suppression is the last strategy that I'll talk about today, and it's used when journalists want to lean on brevity, using very few words or just simple social media reactions such as liking or loving a post, or perhaps sharing a post without adding any additional commentary. So that's retweeting on Twitter or X, or they might respond to posts or comments with emojis or memes or GIFs. But several goals lie within this strategy. They use it to mask interactions. They use it to obscure this like massive collection of their interactions over time. And they also use it to participate in conversations without this deep display of emotional involvement that can come with a much lengthier response. You guys have seen the Kermit the Frog give, so they try to avoid that and post something very simple that kind of leads others to figure out what it is that they really mean. So suppression lacks the tenacity of this kind of self-assured strategy like moxie or strategic inquisition, but it still feeds the appetite, albeit slightly, to participate in online conversations. So in discussing the role that identity plays in their decisions to enter these conversations, participants really noted the intricacies of managing these dual identities and how they prioritize those identities, with several participants focusing on their race and gender, their sexual orientation, nationality, or their profession. And so many of them had no qualms about discussing race, like particularly their biases or their vested interest in certain issues that were affecting Black people or other marginalized groups. But, when it came to presenting their own opinions on those issues, several participants noted, this kind of push and pull of managing their personal and their professional identities online. And so Frank here, who has more than 25 years of experience, said that residing in his Blackness and his queerness feels like a daily assault on his existence, particularly when he's online. And so he regularly peppers himself with questions, he asks himself about his responsibility as a gay man, as a journalist, as a trusted messenger. All of these things taken together can be an emotional roller coaster. He says it's a lot of pressure. I just want to make sure that I'm not doing too much more than I'm doing enough. And this research also explored the role of professional demographics in decision making. And so journalists working at publications that center the Black experience, for example, they discussed this lack of restrictions for employees and their online activity, because not only do those journalists write and post socially with consistent personality, like consistent snark and cheekiness on their own accounts, but the social media accounts of the actual news organization also operates within the same vein. And so doing that at a non-black owned news outlet proved to be risky for black journalists. And participants even pointed to this uneven enforcement of newsroom rules and how it's pretty much inevitable that, when sanctions are at the whim of an editor who may not really understand the essence of the employee's frustrations, that there's a lack of fairness in applying those policies. And in these cases, white privilege is apparent and a just like a precursor to the reprimand of black employees. And so participants from various types of news outlets, from print to digital to broadcast and TV and radio, they describe like a variety of social media policies that are sometimes general, sometimes they are overly prescriptive, sometimes they're really unclear, or they're just flat out unevenly applied. And so when journalists are penalized for these rule violations, Bridget, who you see on screen here, is, she's a manager, and she said she can't help but wonder whether, if that person were a different color, would that sanction be as strong? So she says, I think it comes down to how these policies are applied, and I think it's whoever is at the top and how they're feeling that week, which is not a great way to have policies administered, and I think she's right. So this research shows that all three theories that I discussed earlier, co-cultural theory, professional identity for journalists, and ventriloquism theory, it shows that all of these theories are still valued and valid. And black journalists practice these strategies that I discussed today because they are still a co-cultural group, still a marginalized group in the profession, and they are not disregarding the professional identity as a journalist, but many of them are reprioritizing and refusing to devalue their personal identities for a job. And so news organizations cannot expect black journalists to be in conversation online with news consumers when there is, in many instances, a lack of clarity and cohesiveness of the policies in the newsrooms and across the industry, and then also this uneven application of the penalties when the journalist is deemed in violation of whatever the rules may be. And so it makes sense that the approaches vary because the rules vary from news organization to news organization, as does the willingness to accept whatever the rules might be. And so even those who know it's downright dangerous for them to enter the fray, these black journalists who are like, okay, I know I might get in trouble if I say this, which I've actually seen journalists like Nicole Hannah-Jones say, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, and then they say it. So they still enter the fray, even though it's downright dangerous to do so. And the ones who refuse to enter the fray don't, because it's too dangerous. And so my greatest recommendation is for news organizations, and particularly those that are majority white, is a reset. They have to heed these observations that I pointed out today. They have to involve black journalists and journalists of color in their social media policy creation, and they have to earnestly diversify their ranks so that the chances of allyship and more importantly, understanding of what black journalists endure online is increased. And so they really have to also evaluate their encouragement of black journalists to be online and to also still protect their news brand at the sacrifice of their own personal identity. So there's a lot of room for improvement in social media policies for employees. And so my recommendations for future research, I would love to do a content analysis of social media policies to really demonstrate the similarities and differences. That is not something that I did in this study. It was simply focused on the black journalists' experiences and what I found in the research about the policies, but there was not a heavy concentration on that in this research. Participants also talked about, particularly the ones in management, talked about how different they were now, and that they've changed since climbing the ladder. And so I think that deserves some further exploration to see, well, how how did you operate on social media before you became a manager? Because in the beginning, you're the person who has to follow the rules, and then you become the person who's making the rules and has to enforce the rules, and that often became sticky for some of the participants who work in management. I'm interested in seeing what new journalists are being taught, what's being taught in the classroom. Are they willing to enter the fray? Are they falling back, to hold on to that so-called good job, which was something that many of us have learned at our Thanksgiving Day tables and whatnot. You hold on to that job. And this fourth one on the screen was actually proposed by a participant who has handled social media accounts for broadcast journalists before. And so there is, with an influx or this growth in having like social media journalists, which was the title of one of the participants. You have these social media journalists who either report on social media or report primarily for social media. And so I would love to know, how that specialization makes them, the same or different than other, traditional, more traditional or digital print journalists in the profession. And then finally, an analysis of newsroom responses when employees are harassed or threatened online. I think would really contribute to the communication scholarship. I recently co-authored a manifesto with Dr. Denitra Walker, who's on the call, and we called that manifesto "Newsrooms Must Be Radical About Protecting Black Women Journalists." And the manifesto essentially urges U.S. newsrooms to take a long overdue, well-defined, radical, action to increase their protection of the least protected, most valuable player on their employee roster, and that's Black women. So, it seems prudent to strategically analyze and assess how they respond to those threats. And now, questions. Green.
Erin, thanks for that presentation. Everybody can now raise your thumbs on Zoom or give whatever other sorts of messages you think are appropriate. This is the period, this is a public, loving the applause out there. Thank you, Dr. Nails, Professor Nails, and many of the rest of you. This is a public lecture defense, and this means that the public has the first chance to ask some questions of the candidate. Erin, I'm going to ask you to do the bulk of the recognizing of people who are raising it. I see a hand already raised from Tracy, if she would like to go first, and after that, please feel free, Erin, to take up people as you see more hands going up now.
Okay, sounds good. Dr. Boyce, please.
Dr. Boyce, pardon me.
Hello. Congratulations. I thought your presentation was excellent. And I did have a question. Out of your participants, I'm just curious, what was the makeup in terms of gender? Like how many men, how many women? And did you find that there was a difference in the responses or the strategies used by the men versus the women?
Absolutely. Yes, so to answer the first question, in the pre-interview questionnaire, there were 37 men, 17 women, and 1 transgender person. For the interviews, there were actually mostly women, 22 women and 9 men. I had no transgender participants for the interview. For your question about the difference in responses, yeah, I felt like the men were a lot more willing to practice moxie. There now, in some cases, or in one case, Kyle, I call this participant Kyle. Kyle owned his media organization, and so he pretty much said, "Yeah, I'd say what I want to say," He had a lot less restrictions than a lot of people. But Felix, who I hope that you all would ask about, Felix, is he's employed full time. Felix keeps a lawyer on deck because Felix wants to know. He asks his lawyer, "Look, I don't care that you agree or disagree with what I want to say. My question to you is, can I say it?" And so, so he was way more willing to just, really go for the gusto and say whatever it is that he wanted to say on social social media. Nia, who is a photographer, and also Noelle, they were a lot more reserved. Nia was one who I think I mentioned earlier, talked about dating aspect or dating prospects and not wanting to say something that might push someone away. And Noelle flat out said, "I don't want the smoke." I don't want the smoke. So Noelle was very reserved in that regard and practiced suppression quite a bit. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Jamel. Hi, Jamel.
Hi, Erin. Congratulations. So proud of you. So my question is about the Perry's inverted pyramid. It looks amazing. And I know language is very important to you, so I was wondering how you selected the words that you did for that.
That's a great question. So for yielding, I think I just looked at all of these responses and I said, what is the catch-all word for what they're doing? And so when participants would talk about just like making space, holding space for other people, that to me felt like I'm going to yield my time. I'm going to yield to you because you have you are better positioned to speak on whatever this topic is. And I also should probably say I am a member of a sorority, and so when sorors do stop in a meeting and say, okay, and I yield my time, and you might also hear our Congress people say the same thing, and so I think that's probably how I did that specifically for that term. For Moxie, that one just kind of popped in my head one day. Everyone is always like, what is Moxie? And it's like, oh, you got Moxie. She's bold and candid, and so that's why I chose that one. I'll give you one more example. Strategic imposition. I think I thought of that after learning a little early on in my doctoral program about strategic ambiguity. And so I looked at how these journalists were saying, they were all questions like, did I really just hear that? Or did you really just say that? And so instead of going with ambiguity, I went with imposition because it was a question. So thank you for that question, Jamel. I hope I answered that for you. Dr. Sarah.
I found your research to be fascinating. Congratulations on a great presentation and all the work you put into it. My question is on essentially understanding how journalists would use those strategies in one post. So I'm wondering, is it possible that they would be able to use more than one strategy in one post, or is it each post would have a specific strategy and that's how you kind of looked at it?
No, they totally could. I am trying to think of one. If I have the definitions on a different screen here. Let's look at Wanda. I pulled up Wanda's quote earlier where she was talking about, she was the one who practiced strategic imposition quite a bit. And so there was a point that she mentioned where there was a consideration to expunge. We didn't really get to expungement, right? But there was this idea that, oh, well, maybe I should actually delete that, right? So you could start with, did they really just say that, or did I really just hear that right, or why did you ask that question? And then later on, you might go back and actually delete the record. If I try to think of a different one. Okay, so if someone we didn't talk about avoidance today, but avoidance it can be platform avoidance, it could be topic avoidance, it could be user avoidance, right? And so that kind of can go hand in hand with veiling, right? Veiling is when you're present online, but you're not actively participating in those conversations. Whereas avoidance, like I might be over here, but I'm not over here, and so I think that's another one that pairs pretty easily. You might avoid a particular topic on a social media platform, but you're still present and lurking around and paying attention to what's going on. So yeah, absolutely, they could be paired. Thank you for the question. Hi, Vince.
Hi. Excellent presentation. On your pyramid, which I
Yes.
find ingenious, did you, among the participants, what category of those was the most of them? You know, which was there anyone that there were more people percentage-wise in that category as opposed to the others?
Yes, and so that pyramid, that inverted pyramid, is listed in its frequency. So it's the most used strategy down to the least used strategy. So that most used strategy right there at the top was yielding, and so most participants talked about kind of falling back and doing more sharing of other posts than they would, necessarily like writing their own posts. So, for example, if a let's say you have a woman who is a sports journalist, and that sports journalist talked about being sexually harassed in locker rooms, a man participant wouldn't necessarily pontificate on that topic, on their own on Facebook or Twitter, or whatever social media platform they might be active on, but they would simply reshare. Or if they did add any language to that, again, it's more so just like promoting what that person already said, or encouraging other people to read it. That will be the limitations of them actually adding more to sharing that post.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Looks like
Dr.
we have two
Mesmer.
more questions, so yeah, let's go ahead and have the ones we have.
Okay, sounds good. Dr. Mesmer.
Hi, thank you so much. Your presentation was amazing. It's so exciting to see, and your work is so important. I'm wondering about whether or not your participants talked about sanctions or moments that made them switch to different types of strategies. Like maybe they started using some strategies and got either really negative or positive feedback that prompted them to use different strategies moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. I'll go back to Wanda, the participant who talked about being called into HR. She practiced strategic inquisition quite a bit. And after that, she's kind of like, wow, like I'm a manager and they have called me out on this. I can't tell you exactly what she tweeted about because that would be too close to revealing who she is. But she was definitely called into HR, and after that, she's like, I need to stay off of social when I am mad about this particular topic, because it definitely caught some folks' attention. And I'm looking at my list of participants here. Bianca is 20-something, a late 20-something. My AirPod here. I can get it. That's a technical difficulty. Okay, here we go. You all can hear me okay? All right, great. I have a little. So Bianca talked about how she didn't really want to be affiliated with certain people online, so she would practice grouping. And grouping as a strategy is really just saying, I'll connect with this person, but I won't connect with this person. And then there started to be, that things started to gel where she's like, okay, well, I do kind of have to pay attention to what people are doing online, even if I don't really want to be connected to those people. And so then I think that becomes more of like a veiling situation where she's aware of what's happening online, even if she's not actually connecting with the people who are sharing the information that she's trying to avoid, or those actual users that she may be trying to avoid. Thank you for that question. And last, Talia.
Hey, Erin. Really great
Hi.
presentation. I'm wondering, one, do you have plans to share your findings with newsrooms? And if so, please put ProPublica on the list. And second, understanding that this isn't the subject of your scholarship, but do you think it's reasonable to extend some of your findings to other journalists of color, and not just Black journalists, because we're thinking about our social media policy and how this might have implications for, kind of our policy overall? Thank you.
Absolutely. One of the things that I am hoping to do, and I think there's another step in here though for me, I would love to do that content analysis of social media policies so that I know actually what do these policies say. The participants did talk about some being too general, some being too detailed, that sort of thing, but I need to extend this to um, journalists who are not Black and to other people of color. Yes, and I also think that it could work well for white journalists. For the pre-interview questionnaire, there were some people who tried to take that survey, but when they got to the race question, they identified as white, which meant I couldn't use that, for this particular project. But it also demonstrated that there's a strong interest in the topic, right? So I would love to know what strategies are white journalists using. Do they feel the need to yield? Do they feel the need to they practice moxie more often than not, but do they feel the need to practice modification and change their messaging on LinkedIn versus Facebook versus Twitter, X, or what have you? So absolutely, I would love to extend that research. I started with Black journalists because it's home. It's home for me. It caught my interest, and it's value, and it hasn't been done before. Thank you for the question.
And thank you everybody for your questions and your attention. That's really gratifying. We always thank the family because they tend to go unsung, but a network of friends and colleagues who are waiting to see the work is a real gift for a doctoral candidate. So thank you all for your attention. Thank you for your good questions and for your feedback going ahead on this. Hoping there's not too many. I know we could probably go on for a few more hours here, but the committee has its job to do too. So now I would like to ask everybody except the committee. I think none of us have been kicked off in the last 5 minutes from Zoom. Thank you, Zoom. And the candidate to please excuse yourselves and to wait for the good news. I'm sure somebody will send up white smoke from the Newgate Hall as soon as there's a committee decision. Thank you, Wayne State faculty, graduates, fellow students, professionals, and other academics from around the country. Great audience.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
So proud of my sons.
Fred, are you able to save the chat for me?
I should be able to say. I think
And if she didn't get it saved, Adriane Mayes has it recorded live. She'll go to 30 minutes and see all the amazing people that have shown love for Dr. Erin Perry on her birthday. Let's go. We only do billionaires and millionaires around here. And then trillionaires. I can. I will. I must. Happy birthday, Dr. Erin Perry. Wayne State University, you have a good one. Let's go.